please subscribe and don't forget to press the bell icon to get notified whenever we upload a new video.
Well, it's been nearly 2 weeks since the 11,400 crore rupee PNB fraud came to light. The investigative agencies, the CBI and the Enforcement Directorate have been attaching many properties of Mehul Choksi and Nirav Modi, the alleged masterminds of the fraud. Just a short while back, the Enforcement Directorate has summoned PNB's chief Sunil Mehta for questioning. Utkarsh Chaturvedi standing by now with the latest. Utkarsh, take us through today's action.
So, Shireen, today, first of all, the ED has summoned the MD of Punjab National Bank, Sunil Mehta. And Sunil Mehta was also questioned by the CBI on Saturday. Now, what we are picking up as well is that the ED Finance, KV Brahmaji Rao, was also questioned by the Enforcement Directorate today. KV Brahmaji Rao was questioned by the CBI yesterday. So, clearly now, as we have been saying, that both these investigative agencies, whether it's the Enforcement Directorate or CBI, are not really willing to buy the argument what PNB has given, that there are only two people who are behind this whole fraud. In fact, if you look at CBI has already made 6 arrests. And now Enforcement Directorate really questioning the ED Finance of how is it that the senior officials of the bank were not really aware of the fraud. So clearly ED is now moving its investigations from mere seizures and searches to other investigations. In fact, we picked up in the morning that the letter rogatory has been also been, the ED has gone to the court and asked for issuing of letter rogatory. Now, what happens there is that they get a chance to really go ahead and investigate in other countries as well. So clearly, ED moving and widening its scope of investigations. They have been really busy with all the searches and seizures to protect all the money, but now they're moving forward, and the questioning of ED Finance today and the summoning of the CMD of Punjab National Bank really states that.
All right, Utkarsh, appreciate you joining us here with those details. But let me also update our viewers on a story that you can see flashing on your screens. ACC's board meeting has just concluded, and they have now decided not to proceed with the merger with Ambuja as of now. So this is coming in from ACC. The board meeting is concluded. They are not going to proceed with merger. The Ambuja merger as of now. We'll get you more details on what this means for the companies. But this is the breaking news at this hour. The ACC board meeting concluded, and they've decided not to proceed with the merger. Kritika, you have anything more?
Hi, Shireen. So they haven't. So as of this point in time, Shireen, they have called off the merger, but what they say is that this is the ultimate aim. So what they say is that, I'm just quoting the exact release, is that in the board meeting held today, the board has decided that they are of the view that there are currently some constraints to implement a merger between the company and ACC. I didn't get much time to talk to the company, but what I understand is that there were some regulatory hurdles, there were some competition issues which led to this. Consequently, the company is not pursuing a merger at this point in time, though it remains the ultimate goal. What I understand is that this is something that they have in mind in a long term, but since they had a deadline, Shireen, and the deadline was ending within this week, they had to make a final decision and make an announcement on this. In the meantime, with a view to maximize synergies and unlock additional value for shareholders, the board has approved an arrangement with ACC for sale and purchase of material and services on mutually agreed terms. Further details in this regards will be announced in given time, and the proposed arrangement between related parties will be placed before the shareholders. So for now, what they are doing is that they're putting this on hold, but this is not called off. They are ultimately looking at doing this, but it looked like they were missing the deadline, Shireen, and as a result of that, they had to take a final decision on this.
Okay, but we still don't understand why it's come to this pass. Nigel also with us. Nigel, this is something that the street will be surprised by, because it didn't seem like this was on anybody's radar.
Absolutely, Shireen, because if you just take a look at it, when this particular news was broken out, at that point of time, the street took it very, very positively. And after this was confirmed, the street was working with margin expansion of around 300 to around 400 basis points. I'm just looking at a note when, in fact, this was announced. And at that point of time, JPM, they are saying that the scale and synergy benefits look compelling. They expected margin accretion to the tune of around 300 to around 400 basis points. And 20 to 25% of the EBITDA could get a boost if, in fact, both these two assets come together. So if both these two don't really get merged, then all these synergy benefits go out of the window. Remember, in the past quarter, ACC as well as Ambuja Cements, both of them delivered very, very strong numbers. And just to run you through the shareholding pattern, Shireen, Lafarge Wholesome, that's the parent, that holds nearly 64% stake. in Ambuja. Ambuja, in turn, holds more than 50% stake in ACC. So bringing both these two together, it would help them a lot because it will help them in pricing. It will help them because then you're not talking about a 30 and a 35 million ton, individual capacities. You're talking about 65 million tons. So it helps them in pricing. It helps them in synergy benefits. It helps them in logistic costs as well. So this will go down as a disappointment. But as you and Kritika were talking about, they're saying that at this point of time, they're not proceeding with the merger. We'll have to understand why exactly this didn't go through. But this will be taken negatively. Short point. ACC as well as Ambuja, they should open up lower in tomorrow's trading session.
Okay. Just hang in there, Nigel. We've also got Murtaza Arsiwala, analyst at Kotak Institutional Equities, joining us. Murtaza, what do you make of this development? There isn't an explanation that's come in from the ACC board on why they've decided to call this off, but that's the decision that's been made.
Right. So essentially, if you ask me, while the street was building its hope on the merger coming through, and the synergy benefits, though they were working on, were sort of numbers which were put out by ACC and Ambuja way back when Ambuja was going to acquire they were acquiring the ACC shares. So the management, to be fair to them, had never really put out the numbers on what the eventual merger. So one was the restructuring of ownership, but they never really put out what the benefits of the merger would have been. Now, again, if you look at it, while it will be a negative surprise, for the street, which was banking on the merger to come through, I wouldn't say, it was completely not thought of. In the sense, there were constraints. There were constraints in terms of, the stamp duty registration phase by the entire merger exercise, the regulatory cost of merging the two entities. There was also the issues around transferring limestone reserves and, the additional cost incurred. And on the positive, you would have the logistic cost savings. Now, again, if you map ACC and Ambuja, you realize that they are entities which are sort of, they have been sort of under common ownership for a long while. So most of the incremental capacities have been conscious of not overlapping too much into each other's market. These traditional capacities have. And so maybe the math wasn't fully working, or you weren't getting an absolute... in terms of, the incremental cost of the merger versus the savings that the merger was going to bring through.
Sure. Let me also bring in Rohit Natarajan, analyst at IDBI Capital Markets. Rohit, appreciate you joining us. The point that Murtaza was just making there, perhaps both sides realized that the regulatory costs, the other costs associated with this merger were not commensurate with the cost savings or the synergies that they had earlier estimated. What do you make of this decision of calling off the ACC-Ambuja merger?
So as of now, from the information that I have, it is put on hold. So let me believe that, yes, it has been called off, but there could probably more caveats to it, something more to do with it. While I do understand that in the Western market and the Northern market, the concentration ratio will have a regulatory hurdle for both ACC and Ambuja, the merged entity. But having said that, these things were there in the backdrop for some time now. So they would have thought something on these lines. So maybe ACC would have had to go without some of the plants, or they would have had to spin off a certain entity. But the terms and structure is unclear for the time being. And what exactly has been there in the mind is it is uncertain for the time being.
Yes, they're saying that they're not proceeding with this at this juncture. Murtaza, if this is really going to be about, in some form or fashion, reworking this, what do you believe the considerations will be?
So I don't think so. I mean, it's not so much a matter of consideration, because if you look at, even the restructuring exercise which was done and given effect to after a rather long delay, it happened pretty much at, the fair market price sort of ratio. So I don't think it's so much about the consideration. It's more about, is there a incremental benefit of merging the two entities? You've got two entities which have been operating under a common ownership for a long time. They've been doing their sort of thing in terms of, while the volume growth was challenging in the past relative to peers, they had stepped up on that front in the last 2 or 3 quarters, or the last calendar year, so as to speak. So I think it really boils down to, do we have so much to gain in terms of synergy benefits, or we are doing as fine under a common ownership? I mean, ACC is still a subsidiary of Ambuja, so, technically speaking, it shouldn't make much of a difference to Ambuja, but for synergy savings that could come through, and if those were not very clear relative to the increased regulatory cost, I guess that's what's sort of making you put it on hold, at least for the time being, or the lack of clarity on those regulatory costs.
Yeah, all right, gentlemen, we'll have to leave it there. We will, of course, get back to you if there is more that we get from the management. But for now, Rohit Natarajan and Murtaza Arsiwala, appreciate you joining us here on the story that's breaking on your screens. ACC has decided to shelve the Ambuja merger at this juncture, is what the company says. It's time for a break, but stay tuned. There's a lot more coming up. The Communist Party of China has paved the way for President Xi Jinping to stay in power indefinitely. Yesterday, the party announced that they will amend the country's constitution that says no president or vice president shall serve more than 2 consecutive terms. The idea of limiting presidencies in China to 10 years emerged in the 1990s to avoid the chaos that prevailed under Mao Zedong. Here to discuss this further is George Magnus, Senior Advisor, Economic Advisor at UBS. George, appreciate you joining us here on CNBC-TV18. What do you make of this amendment? Some political analysts who are looking at China believe that this is the party's way of saying that, look, we need more time to be able to execute and implement the vision that Xi Jinping has for China.
I should tell you, actually, I'm not with UBS anymore. I'm with China Centre at Oxford University. But anyway, be that as it may.
My apologies.
Yeah, no problem at all. Life moves on. I mean, this is I think this is the extremely charitable, but actually probably quite wrong interpretation of the constitutional change that was announced over the weekend. It used to be said, for example, during the first 5 years of Xi Jinping's term in office, that we just have to wait until the second 5-year term before he becomes serious about economic reform and liberalization. We should get used to the idea that that era is over. It's not going to happen. So it will be really for political scientists to speculate as to why specifically Xi Jinping and the Communist Party have agreed to announce this. But he will become effectively president for life if he wants to, or for a very long time. And I think this tells us more about the authoritarian nature of China than any prospective change in, liberalization, for example.
Sure. So if you believe that this is in fact going to mean more consolidation of power, it is going to mean more control in the hands of Xi Jinping, what is the message that investors, foreign investors investing in China, should take away from this decision? It's, as you might expect, it's equivocal, right? Because on the one hand, you could say that if Xi Jinping and his government obviously is secure, permanent, long view, all of these things that we assume about authoritarian leaders, or we might even call them dictators nowadays. If you assume all these things are true, you could assume that that means more certainty for business. And therefore, since, for example, international investors will be benchmarked more to the Chinese equity market in future because of the admission of the Chinese stocks to the MSCI, for passive investors, you might draw some comfort from that. I wouldn't personally, because I think it's an extremely retrograde and backward step in terms of corporate and political governance. And I think it gives the government license, really, to do pretty much whatever it wants, even more than before. What is the message that neighboring countries should take away from this? I mean, we've had a sort of tenuous equation with China over the last several months here in India. So has the United States. What's the message that governments across the world should take away from this?
Well, that's a really interesting question. And I think it's obviously extremely sensitive. as much for for Delhi as it is for Washington and lots of other places, because in a way the greater authority and confidence that I think the Chinese president will derive from his extended stay in office, shall we say, actually increases the risk that China will make missteps or errors in terms of its international relations policy. So, as I'm sure in India, everybody is more than aware much more aware than they would be in the Western world, for example, about the string of pearls, ports and facilities, much more aware about the Chinese Navy in the Indian Ocean and all sorts of things going on in what India has traditionally regarded as its own kind of sphere of influence. These things actually have run the risk, really, of becoming more tense and more dramatic.
Well, that is certainly the case. George Magnus, once again, appreciate you joining us here on CNBC-TV18 to explain to us the implications of China's decision to drop the presidential term limit and what that will mean, not just for investors, but for governments across the world. And apologies once again. Thanks very much for your time. Well, the government is gearing up to introduce a new law. It's the Fugitive Economic Offenders Bill. In a bid to checkmate absconding corporate defaulters, the Law Ministry has already approved the draft bill in September last year. But now Moneycontrol learns that in the wake of the 11,400 crore rupees scam at Punjab National Bank, the government does not want to waste more time and it could introduce this in the second leg of the budget session. What we are given to understand is that there was a crucial meeting today in the Finance Ministry on this issue. Now, according to the draft bill, a fugitive economic offender as an individual who has an arrest warrant issued against him for a scheduled offence and who leaves or has already left India so as to avoid criminal prosecution or refuses to return to India to face criminal prosecution. The draft bill includes a provision to settle the absconding defaulters' dues through attachment and disposal of their properties in cases where the defaulting amount exceeds 100 crore rupees. But there are concerns with respect to this particular bill, and I am given to understand that due process must be followed, and that is what the government is trying to get legal opinion on at this point in time. Will it be taken up in the next session of Parliament is the question. On that note, it is time for us to wrap up this edition of What's Up. Thanks very much for watching. It's a positive start to the March series. It's seen follow through today as benchmark indices close to 1% higher in today's trading session. That and more when we return on Markets Day Talk. Back coming up next.